this ideology or that ideology, this religion or that religion. Which should win out in this historic moment of transition? And my claim here is that this is the wrong frame to approach this with. Because ideologies and religions, these are maps. And maps are sets of ideas and myths and concepts and perceptions about what is valid and invalid, moral and immoral, that guide people in a society. And as maps, they have power to them. They help us to actually do things and accomplish things in the world. And like with any tool of power, maps can be abused and used in ways that are harmful and destructive and evil. Some people would say evil. But power can also be used in ways that brings healing and that brings life and that supports values that people care about. And as such, there's usually around any given map going to be people who support the map and support the use of that map as it is manifest in society, and other people who see its abuses and feel its abuses and oppose use of that map. And my claim in this video is that what actually needs to happen is that for whatever map ends up having power in the world, there needs to be a healthy collaboration across these pro-map people and the anti-map people. And in this video, I want to use two examples to sort of explain my point. And the groups I'm going to look at are pro-woke, anti-woke, and pro-religion, anti-religion. And I realize people might be like, wait a second, which religion might matter? Christianity versus Islam versus Buddhism. And part of the reason I'm choosing just religion is there are some commonalities across these. And also, I think it's important to keep in mind that any given map has quite a bit of diversity within the group of people attracted to that map, within their specific version of that map. So just keeping that on the forefront of our minds is going to be important. And I use salience frames a lot, where salience frames are, if you're thinking about the lens of your camera, what is large and prominent in your camera and what is small and on the edges and maybe kind of fuzzy. That's the way I use salience frames. And for the pro-map people, the positive uses of that map and the possibilities and the hope associated with that map and that map's use of power is what's super prominent. And the typical abuses of that map are not very prominent. They're really small on their salience frame. And the reverse is going to be true for the anti-map group. They have the abuses of power by people using that map and the wrong, painful uses of the map, the over-projection that people using that map project onto other people. All of that is super prominent in the anti-map group, and the possibilities are really small. I want to acknowledge here that the most important critiques coming from the anti-map groups tend to have to do with the way that map interacts with the current power structures. And that's really important. But in this video, I'm not going to talk about that particular interaction, the interaction between power structures and maps. That's kind of a whole nother bag of worms. For this video, I'm going to keep my examples kind of in the more personal or the more low-key applications and misapplications of a map. I should also say that the anti-map people have their own maps. There's no such thing as not having maps. Everyone has maps. It's just how do they use them? So where am I going with this? I want to start out by just briefly touching on this book, which gets at left brain, right brain perceptions of the world, and give a quote from him. And then I want to look at the lens version of this, looking at woke and religious maps. Then I want to look at the projector version of this, looking at woke and religion, where we're both looking at the positive versions of projection and the negative versions. Then I want to look at the maps of the anti-map groups, which I often characterize as having strawman mythologies. Or at least the strawman mythologies of the other grouper of that map are the bad version of the anti-map groups. And then at the end, I just want to briefly touch on how can these groups collaborate, what might need to happen structurally to make these collaborations fruitful. Very briefly, this book looks at the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain. And he kind of makes the case that the left hemisphere is the part of our brain that's in charge of building maps. It's in charge of the symbolic. And it's in charge of power, it's in charge of apprehending. Whereas the right hemisphere is the part of the brain that perceives reality even where reality doesn't fit in with our preconceived notions. And I'm not going to give any more detailed explanation than that, but you can tell that that framework is playing in with how I'm thinking about this particular topic. And I also wanted to give a quote from him because he does sort of bring out, actually, we need this collaboration across difference for societies to be healthy. Oppositions are the ground of energy. Civilizations also flourish when they remember this and fail when they forget. Let's start with the lens analogy around a map. And again, we're thinking about the lens as being able to show us things we might not otherwise be able to perceive, so we can focus deeper and we can go deeper with our understanding. That's the map. And we'll start with woke, and we'll imagine a city council committee where they're deciding on use of funds or something that matters to that city. And there's a dynamic that's going on around the conference table where somebody who's woke and who has that map fleshed out might be able to perceive power dynamics that would otherwise be invisible. For example, there could be somebody on that committee who's from a different cultural background, and when they speak up with a different style than other people on the committee are used to. And as such, people on the committee may just not pay much attention to them or sort of shun them to the side, even if it's kind of unintentional. And somebody with a woke map might be able to see, wait a second, this person has great ideas. But because of the cross-cultural or social dynamic here, their ideas are not coming forth in this committee, even though they should be. What about religion? What does their map help them to perceive they might not otherwise see? And one thing it helps them to perceive might be something akin to the silver lining of bad situations. So if a person loses their job, but they have been paying attention to the narrative of their life and the dynamic of their life, they're constantly watching for in what ways do really bad situations turn into good situations down the road, where down the road you can look back and say, wow, I grew so much as a person because of that bad incident, or there were these other results that wouldn't have happened if the bad thing hadn't have happened. And the religious maps oftentimes focus people on those narratives in a way such that when they hit the loss of their job they really cared about, they have this intuitive sense of the bigger picture of their life, and they're able to fit that in with a story that changes and evolves and has movement. And without that map, and without the many years of sort of following that map closely and watching closely for bad situations being transformed, the loss of a job might be this isolated incident that is nothing but painful. Now, I'll add an asterisk to this one to say a person doing that for themselves is great. A person projecting that onto somebody else can be really mean and painful to them. I'll get to that shortly. But those are just two examples of those groups' maps as they could be used in a positive way. What about a bad version from the pro-map groups? And to think about this, we'll turn to our projector and look at how some of these projections from those maps can be destructive. So we'll even return to the same city council committee meeting example for woke. And a bad version of this projection would be to project a power dynamic where it was not, and especially to do that for one's own use or abuse of power. So we might imagine a bad use of this in that situation would be the woke person doesn't like the way the conversation is going, is upset that their particular preferred policy is not the group consensus, and therefore they start projecting, oh, there's a power dynamic going on. Your majority opinion is really driven by a power dynamic that's not fair. And they use the fact that people will back down when woke language is used to sort of get their way in that situation where the power dynamic isn't there. It just happens to be a useful tool for them to get their preferred policy. Oh, and of course, the anti-woke perceive that situation really clearly. Anytime that's going on, the anti-woke will definitely at least see what's going on. Now, what about the projection with religion? And we can again go to the same example. Somebody else loses their job, and the religious person who is in touch with these silver linings, instead of listening to their fear and understanding their situation, just projects, oh, it's not that bad. There's always a silver lining. That is a really mean and painful thing to do to somebody else, to say, to paper over their pain with a quick phrase or a quick set of Bible verses that minimizes their pain. The appropriate way to react to somebody else's loss of a job or somebody else's pain is to make space for their pain to be seen together, experienced together, for them to express their pain and be together with another person with their pain. And if you minimize it by immediately creating the silver lining, then you're not creating space for them to have the valid and important feelings that they need to work through. So the use of a projector to project onto other people your map can be very destructive. But there are actually also some good versions of the projector. So let's start with woke and think about a classroom. One thing that can happen in a classroom is somebody can get their opinions or their viewpoint overlooked for the same reason as in the city council, where whenever they speak up, they just have different styles of discourse. And if people in their classroom are not used to that style, they may get shunned to the side or just not listened to very carefully. And yet, they may have a ton of potential that for contributing in positive ways. It's just that in that social setting, that does not get manifest. And of course, people figure out their potential through social situations. If someone speaks up and is ignored, then they may take that as, oh, my ideas aren't really that interesting. Whereas a professor with a map who has systemic injustice in focus might be able to recognize that person's potential despite the social setting, and might be able to communicate them to that student the potential they have, which might make that student persist. It might help that student to see in themselves their own potential, even up and against the social dynamic and the cultural differences. And I think a lot of the best versions of projection from a particular map group have to do with seeing potential in others, with seeing something that is positive and hopeful that might otherwise get lost in the situation. Now let's turn to the anti-map people and let's look at some of their maps, because once again, they do have these maps, and the bad version will be the straw man mythology, where a straw man mythology is where you take the most stupid and immoral version of people's understanding within the map, and you project that onto them. Oh, they must be understanding it in this really stupid and immoral way. So that's the straw man mythology. And I call this a mythology instead of just a straw man argument, because a straw man argument is a specific argument in a conversation or debate where the person builds up this really stupid straw man of what the other person thinks so that they can burn that down and, look superior to being so much smarter than that straw man. That's a straw man argument. The straw man mythology is a bunch of that kind of argument that are woven together into a coherent worldview that I think the anti-map groups often take on. And our society basically specializes in strawman mythologies. I sometimes refer to this as Twitter brain because these are patterns that are lifted up and reinforced on certain social media platforms, in fact, on many social media platforms. But there are lots of different techniques. One of the techniques that is common in developing strawman mythologies is taking a developmental stage or a version of that map that someone might have when they haven't really developed out the map. So for woke, a version of this might be that systemic racism is about saying overtly racist things online. And if you really think about it, if someone's saying something super overtly racist that everyone in the country would agree is racist, that has nothing to do with a system. It's not systemic at all. And yet, sometimes anti-woke can project onto woke that is their understanding of systemic racism. So, the developmental phase trick, like looking at what are different versions of what a woke person might believe to be true about systemic racism, taking the most simplistic version and being like, that's it, that's what they all believe. And of course, there probably are people in the woke camp who think exactly like the early developmental stages of that map. There almost always will be. And then another part of the strawman mythology has to do with what is the motivation or drive for somebody to use that map or be attracted to that map. And any given map is going to have lots of reasons that attract people to it. Some people genuinely want to fight systemic injustice and make our systems better. Some people want to use those tools for power because they recognize, oh, anybody who uses that language, people back down and just let them have power. I want some of that power. If you paint everybody who uses that map as having those pathological reasons to use the map, they just want power, that's another part of the strawman mythology. Anybody who uses woke language is trying to incite a communist revolution. That would be another version. What about the anti-religious strawman mythology? And one version of this is as simple as people who are religious believe there's an old man in the sky. That's how they conceptualize God. And once again, I think this fits into the developmental stage depiction I just made, where there might be some kids who really do visualize God just like Michelangelo's painting. That's how they're thinking of God. But as people mature and develop out in their faith, their understanding of the thing that they're interacting with when they interact with God takes many different forms, and they recognize that Michelangelo's painting is just one depiction that doesn't fully capture God. And once again, the strawman mythology includes a psychologizing of that group for the most pathological reasons a person might be attracted to that religious map. Oh, they just want to look down their nose at other people. They just want to judge people who are not like themselves to make themselves feel better about things. So those are the bad versions of the anti-map group. But of course, the anti-map group is essential, and I think they're important for seeing the abuses of power within a map. They're important for seeing these things that really do need to be fixed. It's also true that the anti-map people sometimes have deep and profound and helpful exploration of the ideas. There's something about rejecting a particular map, how it veers you off into a different direction intellectually, such that I've read books that are written by anti-map people where I've learned so much in how they're thinking, even if I think they are overly dismissive of the map, or even if I think actually they're not understanding the map they're rejecting correctly, I still get new insights from from the thinkers in that cluster of people. So my argument here is that any map will be abused if it gains power unless it is held in check by people who can acutely see the abuses of that map. And so whatever map wins, if there's some kind of transition of societal mythologies or societal concepts, whatever map wins is I don't want to say less important, but what matters more than that particular map winning is that particular map having a good relationship with the anti-map people against that map. And this, of course, involves collaboration across contempt. So how exactly could that go about, given that most times people who hold each other in contempt come together to converse? It tends to be counterproductive. It tends to be dysfunctional, where applying effort to try to converse across difference actually makes the problems worse. It makes the straw man mythologies grow, it makes the projections grow, it makes people more defensive. Usually this is not a productive collaboration. So what's the trick here? How do these two groups collaborate? And I'm not going to go deeply into this, but I think one of the ways to make this happen is to have two different spaces, each with their own different ethic and conflicting ethic. So one space is the space where people are free to think, they're free to develop ideas, they're free to chew on their contempt and really look at what is that group doing wrong and harmful and painful. And this is where the artists thrive. It's where the comedians thrive. It's where the really creative academics can develop out their ideas. That's an important space. And the ethic in that space is an ethic of free speech. It's an ethic where we're allowing the ugly, that is the contempt, to be present in that space. Because otherwise, if we try to stifle the contempt, we try to stifle the ugly, we lose all of the creativity and ideas. And then there's a different space with an ethic of collaboration. And that ethic has to involve trying to see one's own straw man mythologies, trying to see one's own projections. That space is all about humility. It's about being open to hearing things that are not what you expect. That's a different type of space. And honestly, I'm not seeing a lot of spaces of that style at present.